Good evening, everyone. It is so good to be here with you in person and also those that are joining us online. My name is Dr. Brennan Jacoby. I'm a philosopher and the founder of Philosophy at Work. Philosophy at Work is a collective of philosophers, business psychologists, academics, authors, a variety of thinkers that deliver thinking skill sessions, talks, and thinking labs for the purpose of creating spaces where people can, what we would say, do our best thinking. So we're working in different organizations and businesses around things like curiosity, critical thinking, self-awareness, and navigating change. Tonight's session is on focus, and I just have to say, this is one of the first few things sort of really in person and fully hybridized. So it's so good to get to be in London, back here with some familiar faces and also some new faces, and really great to be with people online as well. I want to acknowledge Tom online saying, loving the jams. We'll be sort of doing some interactive stuff tonight, so it's not going to be a talk by any means. There'll be some different times when I'll be sharing some things with you, but then it'll be great to get a bit more of a conversation going. And so for those that are online, there'll be some opportunity to connect via the chat and have a conversation that way. And then for people in the room, we'll be relaying some of that back to online. This session really came about because in September, it felt like kind of a new term in a lot of different ways. It felt quite exciting, quite energized, and we thought, you know what, there's a lot going on in people's lives. So I don't know if you were working from home over the last 18 months, and then now maybe you're a bit more back together in a co-located set of circumstances, and then that's exciting. There's a lot of energy, there's a lot of different things going on, but suddenly you're also expected to maybe maintain the sort of level of delivery that you were able to do when everything was optimized without travel and all of that. And it suddenly feels like, gosh, there's a lot going on. It's so exciting to maybe be back in the office with some of our team members, and now focus. How do we do that when there's so much going on? And so we thought, well, let's create a space where we can all come together and think about how we can focus in some ways that are not just sort of the things we might normally think about, but let's go a little bit deeper. So, you know, my background is in philosophy. I did my PhD on the topic of trust, and we still work a lot around saying, how do we create a safe space? Because we know we're not going to be able to focus our best if we don't feel safe. So tonight we'll talk a little bit about some of those things running in the background, because we know that a lot of the things that are inhibitors of focus are not just external. There's a lot of internal stuff. So we'll be doing we'll be doing some exercises tonight that you can take away and do with others that you work with that aren't here. So tonight's session is a little bit of a director's cut. So we'll be going through some different exercises that will hopefully help us find our focus when we really want to, but then also things that you could take and share with others who aren't here tonight and haven't joined. Does that sound okay? Some nods. Good. Okay, good. So the first thing I want to ask you to do is a bit of phenomenology, a bit of what philosophers do when we're saying, what is the experience? What is the felt experience of focusing? I don't know if you'll sort of bear with me. I think this is interesting. So what is it like to focus? If we're talking about, I don't know how many people I've had lately say in meetings, we're just really struggling to focus with everything going on. There's a lot of emotions running high. There's a lot of different things going on. And this thing that we're after, this focus, what is that like? If you sort of just consider in your mind, assuming that we're all focusing on what's going on right now together, what is that like? Maybe there's a felt experience of attention going in one direction. Maybe sometimes when we talk about focus, there's an experience of forward momentum, not sort of being broken up and stopping quite a lot. If you look at the definition of the term focus, it means a center of interest. So it's that experience. If we're saying we're here to find our focus tonight, what we're talking about is finding a way to, together and independently, bring our focus in the center. But actually, that meaning didn't come up until the 1700s. Going back before that, if you dig into the sort of meaning of the term, it goes back to the Latin for literally hearth, or sort of fireplace, which is kind of interesting because it makes focus like this flame. And so in the sort of ancient traditional Latin language, focus was literally the center of the home. And actually the word also was meant to mean family, which I think is a little bit ironic, given that a lot of times the need for focus might be the people that we live with, interrupting that focus. So I think it's interesting to consider the things that are going around our meaning as we think about what we're here to actually cultivate. A couple caveats just before we dive in a little bit more and I get you doing a bit of something. First of all, like perfect focus is not necessarily always what we're after, right? So this gentleman, Chris Bailey, is a Canadian author. He wrote a great book called Hyperfocus. And if you've seen his TED Talk or read the book, he's done a lot of work around actually lack of focus being really positive for creative thinking and ability to generate new ideas. So Chris says, scattering your thoughts, scattering your attention, and focusing on nothing in particular supercharges the dot connecting powers of your brain. So, in his research, he did things intentionally trying to make his focus scattered, intentionally trying to make himself bored. So one of the examples was he sat on the waiting line for Air Canada for 3 hours, just to sort of make himself as bored as possible to see what that did. And we know that there's a lot of work suggesting that scattering your focus, giving yourself some time just to sort of not think about anything in particular is actually really good for creativity. This is one of the reasons that so many of us say, I had a great idea in the bath, or it came to me when I was running, or whatever. So I'm not here saying that we always want to just be laser focused, and the image of a better world that I have is not necessarily for us all to wake up tomorrow and just go sort of from thing to thing to thing, and there's no sort of downtime, and we're just these optimal robots of focus. The point rather is when we really want to focus, either ourselves or with others, but we're struggling, how do we pull that together? How do we make that happen? If we're really energized about something, how do we find our focus when there's a lot going on in our lives? So just first caveat, we might not always want to just focus. The other thing is that tonight what we're going to be focusing on are not just external distractions, right? So, there's noise. My neighbor was chopping down a tree yesterday that made me not focus. Notifications, right? I mean, there's been a lot said about the way that tech can interrupt and also sometimes support our focus. And I wanted another word that started with the letter N, so I said nonsense, just meaning sort of life admin, general stuff that robs our focus. There's been a lot said about those sort of external distractions, and there's been a lot said about how to sort those things out. So for example, we might talk about cleaning the workspace, having a space that we come to do this certain type of work every day the same sort of way, getting up, if you're working from home, getting up, properly getting dressed, those sorts of things. We might talk about setting timers, the sort of Pomodoro method, right? Some of our friends have this thing called Cave Day, which is all about having, you sort of pay to go into a space where they take your phone, there's no distractions, you're working alongside people that are all focused on a creative project or something, and that's a way to help with focus. So we know that there are external distractions, noise, notifications, nonsense, and we know that there's been a lot said about how to address those. With Philosophy at Work, we're really big supporters of those things. We do those things a lot. We exercise, we drink coffee, we turn off notifications, those sorts of things. But tonight what we're going to be focusing on is not those kinds of distractions. What we're going to be focusing on are the sort of thinking distractions, the more sort of internal ones that we just feel like no one's really helped us with yet. So a lot of times it might be that, so I have two boys. I have a 6-year-old named Hugo and a 4-year-old named Frederick. And they're brilliant, but they distract me sometimes. And also, going back to the Chris Bailey point, that's okay, a noisy child or, dog or loved one or, someone you lived with that's not necessarily so loved might be an opportunity to sort of remind you that you're not just your to-do list, right? It's a sort of invitation to come out of yourself and go, oh yes, Hugo, I can play with you. I'm not just this robot, right? So distractions are not all bad, but what I'm saying is there's been a lot of help already around those things. But a lot of things that I feel like I struggle with when I try to focus are not just these things. They're other things that go a bit more deeply, right? So what we're going to be talking about tonight are these sort of thinking traps, more internal distractions. So I've tried to highlight on the left some behaviors that hopefully we can all relate to. And then in the middle, there's these sort of causes of these unfocused behaviors that are not just the noise, nonsense and stuff like that. And then on the far right, that's the thinking skill that we're going to work with tonight to help us address those things and find our focus. So for example, if there's a behavior like procrastination, that's a really common one for us as groups, teams, individuals, whatever, putting things off. We say, I need to focus on this thing that I keep moving down the to-do list. And it might be that there's too many sort of noise and neighbors and things at home. But I also think sometimes it can just be a lack of clarity. Maybe I'm not focusing on it because I don't really know what I should be doing. I'm not feeling clear. And so actually tonight what I'm going to suggest is that self-awareness is a really important thing to cultivate around that, to therefore work it back, cultivate clarity, and then help address the behavior and find our focus. The second one that we'll look at is jumping from task to task. I always just thought, well, that's just my sort of neural makeup, that it's hard for me to focus in that way. But actually, sometimes it might be that I'm jumping from thing to thing because I'm not very interested. I'm assuming that it's just mundane. We get a request to do something that we've done 100 times before. It's a spreadsheet. It's something else. It's hard for me to focus on this because I just kind of feel like I know how this is going to go. But of course, we don't know the future. No one knows the future. So to sort of deconstruct that, we're going to look at how we can use curiosity to re-engage with a seemingly mundane task and therefore address the behavior. And the last one we're going to look at is sort of never-ending brainstorm. So you might be familiar with friends, colleagues that might, you love the early stages of a project and then you sort of find it hard to focus to get onto the next stage, right? It sort of goes on and on and on. And this is for a really good reason. The thinking trap, though, is seeing value everywhere. Well, we could do this, that would be great. We could do this, that would be great. But we need to focus and sort of do something. So decisiveness, making that call, is, I think, the help to work it back to make that sort of decision and go. So this is the kind of stuff that we're going to work on. If we want to chat more at the end about, who loves the Pomodoro method, what are the best sort of noise-canceling headphones, we can get into some of that stuff as well. But I think helping us focus in these deeper ways, we don't normally take the time for. So that's why we wanted to focus in this way. One more thing to say is it's interactive. I'm going to stop talking at you in a moment and ask you to do something. And I'd love it to be sort of real for you. So with that in mind, can I ask you to turn to someone sat next to you and share one thing that you would say, do you know what, here's something on my plate at the moment. It could be about work, it could be about non-work life, whatever. And talking about, do you know what, this is something I really need to focus on. It'd be great to bring that to mind because as we're doing different things, you'll have something to work with, so hopefully you'll leave tonight feeling like this is something that I can actually, it's going to make a difference for me. It's not just sort of interesting. Does that sound okay? Cool, and I hope that sounds good to people at home as well. For those that are dialing in today, if you, I just feel bad that I can't ask you to talk to each other. So if you want to put things into the chat, if there's something you're like, you know, I'd love to focus on this, and you feel happy putting it in the chat, then that's great. And while the room here is discussing, I've got an iPad so I can sort of respond to you and say, sounds great, or whatever. You know, I'll try to do more than that. But that'll be good. So let's spend just a couple minutes saying hello to each other, and then we'll dive into the first thing, thinking about self-awareness. Thanks, everyone.
With all this love, what am I supposed to do with all this love? What am I supposed to do with all this love? Growing up is never ending.
Everyone, we're going to come back together in just about 1 minute, so I invite you to start wrapping up those conversations, and then we'll come back together. Thanks.
Everywhere I overhear people talking, filling up the open air as I'm walking. I can never run a mile in their shoes. Don't listen to the noise that the TVs are playing. Doesn't matter what the papers are saying. I just close my eyes and I see you. Who needs words when everything is crystal clear? When happiness is so
All right, everyone, why don't we come back together? Thanks so much diving into that. And thank you so much for those that left some comments in the chat. Just for those in the room here, because I know that you can't see the chat, there's been a lot of comments saying, well, some at least saying that there's, it's kind of hard because there's so much they want to focus on. And I think that's part of what I'm talking about. We're talking about, prioritizing, moving from thing to thing. Sometimes it's not just, I really need to focus here, but I don't want to. It's more, gosh, there's so many compelling things drawing my interest. And I think something that might be interesting a theme we might develop throughout our session is that rather than seeing that as a negative thing, to recognize the part of the reason that's happening is because we see value in so many places, and that's a really good thing. Tonight we're going to pick up a couple different techniques of ways of choosing, focusing in so we can do that. So really good. Hopefully it's useful just to start sharing some of those. One of the things I said to people in the chat was, hopefully just saying it out loud or writing it out loud in a way is helpful because it makes you get a little bit clearer in what you even mean. What's the thing that I want to be focusing on? So that's the first step. But let's get into doing something with it. And as I mentioned before, one of the first behaviors that I think would be interesting for us to play with a little bit is saying, well, how can I get moving forward? How can I find some focus by clarifying what I'm really trying to do? And so the ask here is to sort of ask our distractions what they're really about. I don't know about you, a lot of times I find that I've lost focus, not because there's noise or something like that, but because actually I'm a little bit scared or a lot scared about the thing I'm meant to be doing. So it's very hard for me to focus on my taxes, right? That takes me ages to do, right? And why? It's one of the few things in our lives that is actually just numbers, and there's an answer to. There's equations, there's things. If you put that up against, be creative, come up with this new thing, surely it should be easier for us just to get on with the taxes, but why don't we? So the reason I want to say is it's not because of the noise of the neighbors or things like that, the nonsense. It's because of there's something at an emotional level, there's something in my thinking that is challenging around this. And so we need to ask our distractions what they're really about. And so I want to share with you a technique that we use a lot in our curiosity workshop. We use it a lot in our self-awareness session. And I love it because it's a great way for us to become more aware of the stuff running in the background of our minds. And it's kind of fun. It's a neural mapping technique that helps us try to understand what something really means to us. Because if I said to you, what's the taxes thing about? Well, that's kind of maybe an easy one. You go, gosh, everyone's scared of taxes, so I don't know. But maybe there's something else that's not quite taxes, that's on your plate. I don't know if this feels exciting enough for sort of an evening after work. But there's a lot of us saying, how do we do this sort of new hybrid way of working together? Or maybe there's something that on the face of it should be exciting, but you find it hard to focus on and move on with. And so if we ask our distraction, well, what's this really about? If I just said to you, what's going on with that? It might be hard for you to come up with something. But if we do this exercise, it might help us get going. So what we're going to do is, if we can go to that camera that's sort of shooting here, I'm just going to do an example, and then give you a chance to do this. And by the way, looking around the room, if you're at home and you have a piece of paper and a pen, now would be a great time to grab it. Or if you're much cooler than me and you have a way of drawing electronically, then that's cool, grab that. But otherwise, you'll just need a piece of paper and a pen. And looking around the room, if you don't have that, in a moment, I have a bit of those things that I can share with you. But so what we want to do is take the thing that you need to focus on and write it in the center of the page. So let's say, okay, so I'm going to say flexible working is a thing that many of us are trying to work out at the moment. And my apologies for my handwriting, but that's me trying. So flexible working, we write the thing down and we circle it. Now what I'm going to do, and I'm just going to model this and give you a moment to do it. So flexible working, kind of like word association, you write the thing down and then you see what pops into your head, right? So, okay, well for me, I think, if say I've got this team and I'm trying to think about, okay, we've given people loads of autonomy over the last 18 months. Now we're trying to say, how do we maintain that, but also come back together? That's kind of a challenge. We need to focus on, it's a bit scary to us, so maybe I'm putting it off and I'm procrastinating. Well, what's this lack of focus really about? Okay, well for me, when I think of flexible working, one of the things that comes to mind is, gosh, we've been through a lot together as a team over the last 18 months. Been through a lot. This feels like, whoops, 2 E's and feels. This feels like a chance to really show appreciation for people. We've been through a lot over the last 18 months. We want to show them that we still care about them with how we're working now. Feels like a chance to show appreciation. I'm just going to say app because I don't want to spend time writing. But then I'm digging deeper. Well, when I think about that, actually I think, but there's a lot of different needs. There's a lot of different things that the team sort of cares about. Lots of needs. Okay. Also, another thing that comes to mind is we need buy-in. And as soon as I think about that, I know I need buy-in from, let's call this person Tom. I need buy-in from Tom. I'm not sure if Tom likes me. So these are the things going in our mind. And actually, if you just sit down to go, what are we going to do about our flexible working plan? I'm finding it hard to focus on it. Well, it turns out it's because I'm concerned about what other people think. And actually, it's because it's really complex. Now, just doing this doesn't tell me what the flexible working policy should be, but it hopefully gives me a bit of constructive way of reflecting on what's really going on. So now I can go, oh, actually, before I can move on with this and focus, maybe I just sort out my insecurity about some of my colleagues. Or maybe I need to make a list of all the different things that people need. Or maybe go out and ask them and say, okay, Katie, what is it that what would work really well for you? Susan, what would work really well for you? And get some of this together, and then I've got something to work with, and I'll be able to keep moving forward. So remember, the behavior was procrastination. The thinking trap was lack of clarity. And the help is awareness about what's going on inside of us. Does that sound okay if I sort of feel clear enough to take the thing that you were just discussing and try mapping it a bit? Cool. Why don't we pop a bit of music on again, and we'll have a go. Just for those at home, I'll just go on to, if we can go back to this slide, there's another one that's a little bit more clearly written, if anyone wants to see that while they're doing theirs, but I think you get the idea. And for those in the room, also, I'll come around with a bit of paper if you need that. Cool. Why don't we spend about 5 minutes, and then we'll come back together. Thanks.
And if you're all that's left, I'll take what I can get. Searching for a dream woman. Searching for a dream woman. Searching for a dream woman. Searching for the dream woman. touchdown in Tokyo. Again, I feel the ground beneath my feet. But it's just another city far away from where I always want to be. Cause every minute that I'm away from you makes me never wanna leave. I can never get used to missing you. Life is always better when you're with me. But this long distance love affair, surviving on a wing and a prayer. Yes, this long distance love affair, yeah. Wake up calls and waiting halls. Everyone exactly like the last. The scratch beneath the surface and the novelty gets tired pretty fast. 'Cause every minute that I'm away from you makes me never wanna leave. I can never get used to missing you. Life is always better when you're with me. But this long distance love affair, surviving on a wing and a prayer. Yes, this long distance love affair, yeah. Cause never finishing forever. Cause every minute that I'm away from you makes me never wanna leave. I can never get used to missing you. Life is always better when you're with me. But this long distance love affair, surviving on a wing and a prayer. Yes, this long distance love affair, yeah. But this long
All right, everyone, why don't we come back together and see how that was? Just one of the comments in the chat was around, this feels kind of like a psychodynamic exercise, which is right. And I wanted to give you a little bit more of sort of where it's come from and what we do with it. So I'm on the screen, as you can see, we're calling it a neural mapping exercise because we're effectively, if we're able to do this exercise with minimal sort of self-editing, then arguably we're mapping some of the neural pathways in our brain down onto the page, right? Because if I say, I think about this topic, and then this pops into my head, and then I think about that, and this pops into my head, then the argument is that, well, those are linked in my brain, and I'm getting some of those neural maps down on the page. This is one that we developed having read a book by Gabrielle Rico, who's a creative writer, and in the book she talks about people who are stuck with creative blocks when they're trying to write a story. And her process that she says to people is, well, say you're trying to write a love story or whatever it is, write the core idea, so love or something, but you're stuck. You don't know how to get started with it. Write love and then do this kind of mapping and see what other things come up around it. that might help you say, oh, well, that's kind of an interesting angle that I could start my story with. So she uses it as a creative writing process, but I also think it's really helpful for us just as a reflective tool. So where Rico is doing it, she's saying, let's take a core, just one word, and sometimes we do that in our self-awareness workshops. But tonight for focus, I thought, let's take even a phrase and just follow the rabbit hole of our own mind a little bit, and see where it takes us. And hopefully it was useful to sort of hear some of that down on the page, as it were, because again, you're asking your distraction what it's about, what's really going on. What I might do is take us through a couple more exercises, and then at the end, we've got a few different microphones and things, and we'll have a little bit more time for people that are online, as well as people here, to sort of share, how some of these exercises were. Maybe we'll find some connections between some of them that I haven't thought of before, and you're going, actually, this is kind of interesting, or that's kind of interesting, or I had an issue with this, and so we can have a bit of space at the end to go a bit deeper. Does that sound okay? Cool, nodding. Okay, good, perfect. So, so hopefully, if procrastination, there's a lot of reasons for procrastination, but if we're stopping from moving forward and we want to focus, and part of the reason is because we just don't feel clear about what we're supposed to be doing, then hopefully backing up and saying, well, what's this really about? Doing some of that mapping is a helpful way for us to take a couple minutes, and it only did take a couple minutes, and then move forward. One other thing, just as a sort of director's cut note, is if you're here thinking about not just your own focus, but maybe getting other people that you're collaborating with on a project to focus, and it feels like you're the only one that's got some focus, and how do we do this? Then this is a great thing you can do, not just with your own brain, but you can do it with the sort of collective brain in the room. So sometimes we'll do this on a wall, on a flip chart, on Miro, however you want to say it, as a sort of platform, so that you can go, okay, everyone, we've got to deal with this. What does that trigger for you? Get that up. What does that trigger for you? And then in one sense, the map you do isn't really any one brain, but it's what's running in the background for the whole team. And so that's something that you could take away and run in a slightly different way, but still find a way to go, okay, well, what's maybe robbing our focus? What's this about? And move it forward. I'm going to move us on to the next one. So we've talked about using self-awareness for clarity and trying to sort of short circuit some procrastination. The next one, if you remember, was jumping from thing to thing, right? So maybe I'm finding it difficult to focus on a task because I'm basically a bit bored. Now, we know from Chris Bailey, that Canadian author that I mentioned before, that boredom's not all bad. Boredom could be good for creativity. But if we're just trying to get on with our to-do list in sort of execution mode, then boredom's not really our friend. And so if we want to move forward, the suggestion here is cultivating some curiosity, because maybe that boredom is about an assumed mundanity, if I can say that. I actually Googled that word before tonight. It's not a word, but you get sort of what I mean. Assuming that everything is just how it's always been, mundane. And of course, that's not true. I mean, we've got it on good sort of advice that the only thing that is constant is change, right? So going back to Heraclitus, I kind of like that the text, the ancient text that quote comes from is these days called fragments, which feels kind of appropriate for what we're talking about tonight. But yeah, I mean, we might feel like we've done this spreadsheet 100 times before, we've done this thing 1,000 times, but we haven't done this one. And so the suggestion is, if we're struggling to focus, there might be a lot of reasons, but if the reason for this instance is that we're kind of bored with it, but we need to get ourselves to focus, then arguably if we can kickstart a bit of curiosity about it, that's going to help us. So I want to take just 5 minutes and take you on a little sort of tour of a lot of different, what I'll call faces of curiosity, a lot of different forms of curiosity. Because sometimes I think we think that curiosity is sort of for us at a certain time of life, So as I already said, I've got young children. We all think of children as curious, right? But not us, now that we're sort of mature adults. Or maybe sometimes we think, well, that's great for sort of my creative colleagues, but that's not me. And I think that's really sad, because we need all of our curiosity. We need everyone to own our curiosity. There's no one person that's going to have all the right questions. We want to, if we get a really diverse group together, that's brilliant, but we're only going to really benefit if we can then make the space for everyone to ask their questions that are really authentic for them and share the views that they really have. So we all need to own our curiosity, and I think to do that, we need to liberate curiosity a little bit from the box of the youth and the creatives, and rather say, actually, it shows up in a lot of different ways. So what I'm going to do is it should be about 5 minutes, but I'm just going to take you on a whistle-stop tour through, it's not an exhaustive list, but 5 sort of main ways that I think we see curiosity coming up. And as I'm doing it, I want you to consider, is there one or more of these ways, are there one of these ways, that feels really natural to you? You would say, yeah, I think that's how I sort of am curious. And also, is there one, maybe 2, that you would say, that's not me, but I'd really like more of that? Or given the thing that I wrote down and told someone I wanted to focus on, gosh, it'd be really helpful if I could be curious in that way, because that's going to really ignite my sort of engagement with the thing and help us move forward. So these are 5, what I'm calling faces of curiosity, and they're all sort of grounded in exemplars of these things. And I want to just consider how they relate to us. So the first one is a bit of a poster boy of curiosity, Einstein, who I think is this great example of curiosity as wonder. You know, it was him, after all, who said, I have no special talents, I'm just passionately curious. And you sort of want to say, really? You know, I don't know if you're telling the whole story there, Albert, but I think, you know, if you do read his biographies and things, you do get the sense that, well, yeah, of course, he worked really hard and he studied, but I think it was a patent office that he worked in before he sort of became the scientist and the physicist that we know him for. And you'd have to be pretty curious to do all that study after a hard day's work in the patent office, or sort of in between things, as he did, right? So when you read his biographies, you do get the sense that, gosh, well, whatever else he had going for him, he was really, really curious. And the way that his curiosity came out was in this form of wonder. So you read him being like, I can't believe this sort of world that I'm discovering when I do these equations. Wow, isn't this amazing? And I think this is, I start here because I think this is the view of curiosity that a lot of us have, and this is the one that sort of is associated with youth. It's like, whoa, can you know, our minds are blown. And maybe that's us, but maybe not. And I think the real shame is when we go, oh, that's all of curiosity. And I don't feel that like in awe of much these days, and so I guess I'm not curious. No, you know, there might be more to that story to talk about another time, but I think that, you know, there's a lot more types of curiosity. And so for us, you know, maybe it's tenacity. Frida Kahlo is famous for her art, but what we often don't know is that before she went into art, she was going to become a medical physician, and she was studying for that, had a really awful automotive accident that put her in hospital. And while she was there, she chose to sort of shift gears and focus on her art and taught herself to paint and do more things like that. And if you know her work, you know that she focused a lot on, she didn't shy away from like difficult topics, right? She brought a lot of her own life's challenges into her work, as many artists do. But I think with her, we see a particular, we see that particularly clearly. With her, she said, if I can get this to come up, there we go. She said, nothing is absolute. Everything changes, everything moves, everything revolves, everything flies and goes away. And what I want to suggest is that her curiosity, maybe there was a bit of wonder as well, but in her, I think we see this example of curiosity as tenacity. You know, imagine her there in the hospital bed saying, okay, what now? You know, how else could this be? I'm not going to just settle for this and say, well, I guess that's my dream's done. You get this tenacity with her. No, you know, what else could happen? Everything changes, so what now? And there's a tenacity to that. Think of pursuing it. There might be some colleagues of yours that, you know, maybe aren't like Einstein doing the wonder stuff, but for them, they're the people that always make sure we get it right and are super concerned to say, you know, how could this be better? They're very tenacious. And I think that's a form of curiosity. That's coming out and going, well, how could this be better? That's a curious question, but it's in the form of tenacity. So that might be us. Tesla famously arrived in New York with, the story is like a couple pennies in his pocket and a map for a flying machine on a napkin or something like that. I don't know if that's true, but that's sort of him as an imagination kind of guy. And if you look at him and compare it to some of his contemporaries, people like Edison, who had a very methodical process that, you know, let's work out how a light bulb goes, and we're going to test each sort of potential filament and do it in that systematic way. In contrast to that, Tesla imagined an idea and then worked back a way to make it reality. You know, he said, I don't care that they stole my ideas, I care that they don't have any of their own. So maybe imagination is a form of curiosity that comes out for you. 2 more. So Audrey Lord, Harlem-based poet, writes a lot in her poetry about difficulties in our own life and sort of seemingly tensions that it's hard to sort of rectify. I'll just read out this quote because I think it's beautiful. "Only by learning to live in harmony with your contradictions can you keep it all afloat." I mean, that's interesting right now, apart from focus, being able to say, only by learning to live with things that feel like contradictions do you keep it all afloat. Sometimes it feels like I got too many contradictions, I can't stay afloat. But she's saying living with that, that takes courage. And I think that's a form of curiosity, coming out and going, okay, so how am I going to make this work? It takes courage to ask our questions sometimes, but also I think it is a form of curiosity that keeps us going, I'm going to keep wrestling with this. I'm going to keep wrestling with it. It takes courage. So maybe that's you as well. And then the last one comes from one of my favorite characters, Yo-Yo Ma, the cellist, who I once heard in an interview on, I think it was On Being from National Public Radio in the US. And he told a story about how he was born in, he grew up his early life was in Paris and then moved to New York. And he had gone from this world of sort of baguettes to bagels. And he said that transition made him often sort of say, gosh, why would you do that? Who did that? And why would they do that? Why would you bake your bread this way and then this way? And what's that about? And then he said that really informed his process as a musician. So he says, if something sounds cacophonous to me, if he really doesn't like it, I try to approach it without judgment. It's almost like a murder mystery. Who did this and why? If you start asking these questions, there's nothing that isn't interesting. And so remember, at this moment, we're trying to say, we've lost focus because we're a bit bored with the thing. We're assuming it's mundane. We think we've been here lots of times before. So the thinking skill that's going to help us is curiosity. And here he's saying, you got to empathize. Why would someone ask us to do this again? Where is this coming from? So it's curiosity in the form of empathy. He says, once you get curious about other people, you can disagree, you can not like where they're coming from, but gosh, everything's going to be interesting. And that's going to help us focus by getting us to engage again. So these are the 5 things that I hope help us to not only focus, but in a bigger story say, gosh, all of us are curious in a lot of different ways, and we can all own our curiosity. And maybe you're thinking of a friend, a family member, a colleague who maybe doesn't recognize that they're curious, but there's another way now to paint curiosity for them and say, actually, yes, yeah, look at this. We need you to own your curiosity, and you can because there's all these different forms. So the question that I'd have for you to consider, and I'm going to suggest that this might be awkward, but I'm suggest that we just take sort of 3 moments of silence and not even have music on. As much as I used to work in radio, and the first thing they teach you is like, you can never have dead air. And I'm now creating dead air, which is really painful sometimes. But I just think, we're here talking about focus, and sometimes some of our difficulty focusing might be because there's so much stimulus going on. So why not create a little bit of silence? We'll be thinking in our own heads. But yeah, why not experiment with that and see how comforting or uncomfortable, because that's also interesting, that might be. So if we just take a couple minutes, and those, whether we're here sort of physically in person or online, to consider, is there a type of curiosity that feels most natural to you? Say, yeah, when Brennan was taking me through that feels like me. And then also, is there another type that might be most important to help you focus on the thing that you wrote down earlier? Is it, gosh, I need some courage to do the taxes, or I need some empathy to, whatever the thing might be. So I hope it's helpful and instructive to sort of find the curiosity to therefore find the focus. I'm going to stop talking for 120 seconds. I'm going to hold myself to that, and then we'll come back together. Thanks. I've got that down. I've got that down as a little bit more than 120 seconds. Some of you look very peaceful. Saw some eyes shut, which is nice as well. And just picking up a comment in the chat as well. Ryder said that Professor Donald Hoffman sits in pure silence for about 3 hours every day. Surely there's nothing wrong with that. I think that sounds amazing. Part of me wants to say, gosh, that must be nice if we can do that. But then I feel like maybe that's too quick to jump to it. Surely there's more time that we can do that. But even just 5 minutes, 3 hours, brilliant. But even just 5 minutes, 30 seconds, allowing ourselves to sort of catch up with ourselves is really key. So again, something we might come back to in just a few minutes when we've got a bit more time for general discussion and other things coming in. But again, I hope that's helpful if there's a focus that is the result of kind of boredom with the task, well, we can get curious about it. By the way, when you leave tonight, and for those physically here, when you leave tonight, you might already have it actually if it was near you. You'll get a little takeaway card that has questions around the self-awareness, curiosity, and decision-making, the different thinking skills, some further exercise that you can do to not only sort of remember what we did tonight, but also take it further. And these questions are on there. For those of you that aren't here with us physically, we're going to send that to you, a digital version, so you won't lose out after the session. So look for that shortly. But these questions might be things that, whatever form of curiosity feels most natural or needed to you. These might be kinds of things that would be useful to sort of throw at your distraction. Do I feel really clear about this? Going back to the self-awareness point we did before. Do I have enough information to move forward? It might be that actually, it's fair enough that you're losing focus because there's just a bit more research is needed before you can really crack on. Do we have any misgivings about this work? I feel like I need to do this, but I'm not sure if this is sort of, at the most extreme sort of moral or less significant. I'm not sure if I'm the right person for this task, and maybe that's why the distractions are coming sort of thick and fast. So there's a lot of questions that we can throw at our distractions when it comes to curiosity. I'm going to move on to the third one. We talked about procrastination and sort of solving that with some self-awareness. We talked about boredom and sort of when we want to get away from the boredom, solving that with curiosity. The third one, let me go back. The third one is when there's that sort of never-ending brainstorm. And I don't know, I'm taking a bit of a leap here. Maybe this doesn't resonate with you as much as the other ones. But I've certainly been in meetings where the start of a project is really exciting. We're saying, what are all the different ways that we might go forward? And there's lots of ideas coming up, but then projects kind of stall, and it's because we're not sort of putting a stake in the ground and moving forward. We're not being decisive enough to move forward. So I think if the behavior is this sort of ever-expanding ideas in the early stage of a project, and we need to sort of focus and keep moving forward, then maybe the thinking trap is something that's quite good, actually, seeing value in lots of different places. And the thinking skill that helps us deal with that is decisiveness, And I'm someone that loves hearing different views and sees value in lots of different places. So I'm running the risk of writing this one just kind of for me, but hopefully it resonates with you as well, in the need to go, gosh, I need to move forward. I need to be decisive. I like too many different things. And so for me to focus, I'm going to have to make a call. Maybe that feels like you. Maybe that feels like a group you've been working with. And so here, we're going to look at decisiveness. And the first thing that I want to share with you is this brilliant quote from Ruth Chang. She's a contemporary philosopher, and she's at Oxford at the moment. But she did this brilliant TED Talk, probably going back like 10 years now. And I keep referring back to it because she's captured something she says here. I'll read it out in just a moment. But something she says, I think, just always goes right to the heart of decisiveness. And I find it to be so freeing. So I just want to read it out to you and see what you think. She says, "Far from being sources of agony and dread, hard choices are precious opportunities for us to celebrate what is special about the human condition. That the reasons that govern our choices as correct or incorrect sometimes run out. And it is here, in the space of hard choices, that we have the power to create reasons for ourselves to become the distinctive people that we are." I'm just going to read that one more time because I think there's quite a lot there. "Far from being sources of agony and dread, hard choices are precious opportunities for us to celebrate what is special about the human condition. that the reasons that govern our choices as correct or incorrect sometimes run out. And it is here, in the space of hard choices, that we have the power to create reasons for ourselves, to become the distinctive people that we are. So the reason I love this quote is because what I hear Ruth saying is, if we're stalled, well, I'm sort of putting this onto her a bit in the focus for the purpose of focus, but say that we're stalled because we're being indecisive, and maybe we're being indecisive, fair enough, because it's a really big decision. We've only got so much budget, we've got to let someone go. I really don't want to ruin anyone's life. I mean, maybe I'm thinking too grand about our job or something, but I don't want to let anyone go. This is a really hard call. And what I hear her saying is, rather than that being like, oh, this awful thing, it's an opportunity to do something that kind of only humans, I could say people, agents, moral agents, kind of only beings like us get to do. And that is assert our agency, go beyond the sort of rules that dictate what we should do. So, because if we're only ever making decisions based on crunching the numbers or the pros and cons lists, we do a pro and con list and there's a really clear outcome, oh, well, I should do this. Then there's a sense in which I didn't actually make the decision. I used a process to let the facts tell me what I should do. And that's okay, but I didn't really sort of go, I'm going to now decide, I'm going to sort of assert my autonomy. Equally, I'm a sort of famous one for going out and asking other people what they think I should do, right? And that's even more clearly not me using my agency. If I go and say, oh, what do you think I should do? Should I move to this place or that place? Should I I don't go in this direction or that one? Oh, you think I should? 9 out of the 10 people I asked said I should do this. I'll do that. Well, in a sense, I'm deciding, but I'm kind of not really. Right? So if we go back to the quote, those big decisions are kind of sources of dread, but actually, apart from that, we can kind of celebrate them, because in doing that, sometimes we get hard choices are the places where the reasons that govern those decisions run out. Oh, the pro and con list is 50-50. Oh, I asked 10 people, 5 of them say I should move to this place, 5 say I shouldn't. That's not helpful. But rather than going, oh, I'm stuck, we should say, no, that the reasons that govern our choices have run out. I'm in a special place to actually assert my autonomy, agency, and actually make a call, which is quite scary, because now I don't have a list or friends to blame if it goes wrong. It's just me, and that's sort of getting very deeply, very quickly into existentialism, which we're not going to sort of do right now. But getting into it and saying, no, there's something really sort of beautiful about that, and that's why I love this quote. It's here in this space of hard choices that we have the power to create reasons for ourselves to become the distinctive people that we are. So I'm sort of dwelling here for a moment, because if we're losing our focus because of a lack of decisiveness, then I don't have an easy sort of, I'm going to give you a method in a moment, but I don't have an easy magic bullet. Rather, the message is sort of embrace that. Ask using the mind mapping thing, ask the distraction what it's about. And if you found a tough decision, then go, okay, that's scary, but I'm going to sort of gird my loins, I want to say, and sort of, make a call, while I'm here on Earth. And so I think that's really powerful. So one thing that we do when we do sessions on wise decision making is we in the spirit of what Ruth is saying, we try to go, okay, so that's great, Ruth. I want to, do something while I'm on Earth and make it count, and not just be dictated by crunching the numbers. But how do I do that? I get the spirit of that, but what do I do? And so we use a process, which we didn't invent. We sort of teased it apart from lots of different research and best practice out there about decision making. And these are things that you've probably come across before. But what I've done tonight is I've sort of reframed it in the form of focus. So if the first step is look ahead, well, what might come about? Say that we decide to go, we move to this place or that place. Okay, so let's assume that we do that. What might come about if we do that? Or if we come up with this, flexible working policy, what might be the ramifications? So that sort of famous pre-mortem, right, that is famous in what the military does and a lot of businesses are doing. So what might happen if we do that? Next step, clarify your aims. What do I hope to achieve? We might use the mind map and do some of that and say, okay, what's this really about? Is it about moving to this place, or is it that I think moving is going to somehow reinvigorate my life, or whatever it is? What's really the aim? Third one, and here I'm sort of breaking with what I said we would do tonight a bit. I'm going back into the fact that we're embodied people and not just doing the sort of thinking skills, and saying, there's really good reason that when you're trying to work with things like addiction and behavior change, people say, ask yourself, do this HALT thing. Am I hungry, angry, lonely, or tired? Because we know that if any of those are going on, we're not going to be making our best choices. And so that's like bread and butter when it comes to behavior change. And I think it's really important to notice that that impacts our decisions. So, best not make a life-changing decision when I haven't had any water yet, or I'm just feeling really out of it. So, step 3, check in with yourself. Check the clock. Have I had lunch? When it's that time. Step 4, adjust appropriately. So have some protein. Go and do whatever it is that you need to do. Do your research. Maybe you don't have enough information yet to make the decision, and then come back, make a decision. Not necessarily execute fully. Just go, okay, I think I'm leaning towards this way. Now let me sort of try that out. Okay, well, let me see what it feels like to say, yes, I'm doing this, and then learn from it. Check back in, and see how you can learn about your own self, about your processes, about what's going on for you as you make decisions in this way. So, I'm racing through this. It's a really big sort of thing, but I guess the point that I want to draw out for us tonight is to say that when it comes to decisiveness, which we might need to do to move forward and find our focus because we're otherwise sort of floundering in all the different shiny objects that we might want to pursue, then maybe the thing we need to work on is decisiveness. And there's a lot that could be said about decisiveness, but here's a sort of, if nothing else, 5 steps that we could pick up. And by the way, in case, so that you don't have to write these things down, assuming that you would want to remember them, these points are also on that takeaway card, so you'll have that later. So the last thing that I want to consider as we go forward is the fact that none of these things exist in isolation. So I think it's really easy to think that actually, okay, I just need to be clear because my issue is procrastination, or I just need to understand that everything isn't mundane, so I'm going to do that. I'm going to do these different exercises, and each of them sort of works in a different way. But actually, focus is this. Really, I think part of the reason it's fascinating is it's a sort of the product of an amalgam of all kinds of different things coming together. There's, whether you're hungry or lonely or tired. There's how clear you are. There's how you're relating with other people. There's how all these different things going on. And so, yes, I sort of shared some things tonight that I hope are helpful helpful to you, drawing on self-awareness, decision-making, curiosity. But actually, I think there's a bigger story to it. And so, some of the things that we tend to focus on in terms of like philosophy at work and how we approach it, is all this is situated in a bigger story. And that's because sometimes if we think about how we think, it feels like, oh, we just need to do critical thinking, or we just need to do curiosity. But actually, you can't really that's only going to go so far unless we also feel psychologically safe, and we feel like we can collaborate and trust each other, and we also can think in this way or so. So I guess what I want to say is the things that we did tonight, if you're already doing some practices around like some of these other things, like so we focused on, I don't know if this is going to work. No, the pointer's not there. But we focused on self-awareness, curiosity, decision-making. But if you're already doing something around, certainly what we talked about with focus is relevant to change. If you already have a practice in your life about how you navigate change, then I would really encourage you after tonight to explore how you can weave some of what we did into how you think about change. Or, you're not going to think your best and focus if you don't feel safe. So, how you collaborate with people and think about trust, if you're already doing stuff like that yourself, or reading a book, for example, as yourself, you might be reading a book about trust and psychological safety. If you're already doing that, then think about, well, where does focus come in? If you're here with your sort of work hat on, you're thinking, okay, well, we're already doing stuff in our team around collaboration, then that's brilliant. Some of the stuff we talked about might map into that really nicely. If not, then this is a suggestion that actually what we talked about might need a slot into other things. And if you're here with your work hat on and you're thinking, we're not doing some of this, then let us know. So, have a chat with me afterwards, tomorrow, tonight, whatever. Also, Sophie, my colleague is here, Ben up at the top as well. These are all the things that we tend to focus on because, again, we sat down and said, we talk about them in isolation, but you can't really sort of win on any of them without the other things all working for us. So that's how we landed on sort of the 9 thinking skills that we tend to focus on. My suggestion tonight is we need to think more holistically about focus. It's not just headphones because the neighbor's got a chainsaw. It's all the other stuff. So understanding ourselves, understanding the relationships that we're in, understanding our thinking. All this needs to come together. And I hope that doesn't overwhelm. It's more the hope is to say, oh, actually, if I've got the headphones on, tick, and I've put a sign on my door, tick, but I'm still struggling to focus, what's that about? It might be interesting to explore some of the other things. I've got us down as having just less than 15 minutes left. So I'm going to sort of pause there and open up the floor for a bit of a conversation to go, how was that? Was there an exercise that you felt like that was kind of interesting? Or actually, I had this question about this. Ben and Sophie have mics for people in the room here that, maybe just put your hand up if you want to say something, we can pass a mic to you. And also, I'm going to just bring my attention back to the chat online as well. If there's comments and questions and things there, we'll bring that back in. But I'd love to know, is there one thing that maybe was shared by someone sat next to you, or something that I took us through that you go, that's kind of interesting, or maybe that feels most important to focus at this time? Because something we haven't even talked about is like the climate, the culture in which we're focusing. So questions, comments, thoughts?
Is this thing on?
Just a second. I think so. Yeah.
Hi there. In the first 2 exercises for self-awareness and curiosity, you pointed out ways in which you can invite other people into the process.
Yes.
I didn't see the obvious answer to how you invite people in for decisiveness.
Yeah, good one.
Is there any advice that you have for how you can bring it to larger groups of people?
Yeah.
So with the other 2, I think it was a little self-evident.
Yeah, great question. So I think where there's each of these stages, I think can be done as a collective. So say that, they're like culture clashing to be sure sometimes, but if we need to decide as a collective and you're the team lead and we need to move forward and you want to, maybe sometimes you want to make those decisions yourself, but sometimes you also want to invite people in, then doing this together, how are we doing, as a team, number 3? Maybe not, if you've got this kind of relationship, maybe how lonely are we all feeling? But maybe more so, where are we all at? I think, and actually the last 18 months have really normalized the ability to have that conversation and say, so, we're all, I had a conversation with someone today where we were talking about, we're trying to make some really big calls as a team and go forward, but we need to recognize that everyone's kind of running on empty. There's been a lot of excitement about autumn, but how are we doing? Is this the right time? Do we need to take a bit of time to do something and then come back to this? So I think that element we can invite others into. And the adjusting one, I think that's fair enough. Debriefing is certainly an important thing. I think that we can do collectively. There's a story about the Museum of Failure where, I'm drawing a blank on the gentleman's name that wrote the book, but so I'm from Michigan originally, and in Ann Arbor, Michigan, there's this thing called Museum of Failure where they have failed products just on the shelves, and design teams will come and try to sort of say, okay, has the thing that we're trying to work up been tried and failed before? Because that's really useful to know. There's a story about a team that had come and found that the thing they were working on had indeed been tried, had indeed failed, really useful for them to know, but it had been tried and failed by their company like a decade before. And they had already invested all this time to get to that point because they hadn't done this last stage, basically. They hadn't learned from their process. They had because it was so painful a fail, no one probably kept record of it, right? So I guess what I'm saying is that's an example. of a collective needing to do that debrief, even when things are seemingly painful failures. And so I think you can do that, and that's an example of it being done. To the first one, what might happen? I think we could do that. Well, everyone, what might happen if we go in this direction? I mean, is this going to what you're saying, Teresa? Is there more of a, because I can also see there might be situations where, well, you're the lead, do you make the decision yourself, and then how do you bring people in? Is that speaking to what you're saying? Is that okay? Oh, can you just use the mic, sorry, for people that aren't here?
Hello, people that aren't here. I guess the point here is a good one, which is actually decisiveness ends and starts with you. So you can invite people in for their opinion, but actually the decisiveness at the end of the day is at some point an individual task. Yes, and I mean that Ruth Chang's comment makes it about agency, and agency is individual. I mean, we can talk about collective agency, the agency of an organization, certainly in law, we talk about that a little bit, I suppose. But it still seems that anytime we talk about a group or a collective as an agent, we're kind of extrapolating the concept of agency. Agency is for a person, an individual. So if we understand decisiveness as coming out of that kind of wellspring, then yeah, it is an individual thing. But much in the same way that if you want to lose weight, live with people that like to exercise, if I'm going to be decisive, then that's a collective thing that we can still inspire each other to do, yeah. Other comments, questions? There's one on the chat that I might just bring in just while people are thinking and passing mics. It says, you've spoken about focus as a complex amalgamation of various behaviors, traits. Do you think we've built up the concept of flow in sports, creative tasks, etc., in a way that makes practically building focus harder? Sometimes I think it's hard to even understand what being focused feels like. And yes, I just want to say hi, Christian, for that question. It's great to see you here. So yes, I mean, this idea of flow, going back to that book by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, brilliant work, brilliant name, which again, for those of us, it's been a while maybe since we've encountered that idea that flow is anytime you're doing something like playing the piano, cycling, doing a sport, where it's using just enough of your attention that you can't sort of think too much about other things, but not so much, it's not such a challenging task that you sort of burn out. That flow state is really good for creativity, and it's brought in a lot in sport. And so I guess if the question is, have we built up too much about that to therefore make it practically difficult to build, to practically build focus harder? I think potentially so, yeah. If we've talked a lot about flow, then that can be hard. But it might be that if flow helps us, and I don't know, apologies, Christian, if I'm misunderstanding the question, but if flow helps us arguably focus because it takes up enough of our brain to focus on the task. I know some schools of thought say flow sort of takes us out of the task a bit and helps us just be sort of there. But I think it's again using it. So I'd go back to where we started and say, boredom is a good thing. I'm not saying that we always want to be optimized for focus. There might be times where flow is right, but then other times where we go, okay, now let's get out of that embodied sort of habit. So, the golf club swing is one that you don't want to overthink. You just want to have your body and muscle memory sort of do it. Maybe that's not the space for what we're talking about tonight. But there might be other places where you go, gosh, every time I go to do this golf swing, I'm not a golfer, you can probably tell, but every time I go to do this golf swing, I choke, right? Or I do it incorrectly. So maybe I need to go and do the map to try to work out what my fear is about. So I guess what I'm saying is there might be ways to bring it together and still do the flow thing while also doing some of what we talked about. I hope that's helpful. Other questions in the room? Comments? Yeah, over here. I don't think you need to turn it. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Cool. That's great.
I don't think it's, it is.
Oh, yeah, perfect.
I was wondering about decisiveness. So I think, this is something I definitely struggle with. If you, just looking at the steps, if you feel like there are two options which are almost equally as good and you do get stuck and you can't move forward, what do you do? And you're not hungry or angry or lonely or tired.
Yeah, it's quite nice if you just go, oh, I was just hungry. Great, I'll have some, I don't know, whatever it might be, tofu, and I'll crack on with a great decision. Right? So you're saying if you've got something that seems equally, you can see good in both sides, and you're not halt any of those things, how do we move forward? I think that's a brilliant question, and you now open up all the literature about ethical dilemmas, because a true sort of dilemma is any time that you have two good things that are competing. Ben and I were chatting about this just this afternoon and going, that's really interesting, because we often think about ethics and tough choices as ones where we know what we should do, we just don't want to. But you're talking about, no, actually something where both are really good. And so just to play back to you, is the question, we can see good in both, how do we really make a choice when it's that even?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Or even the opposite. You can't, there's the same amount of bad, if you want, or
Yeah.
risk,
Yeah.
supposedly.
Yeah. So I mean, one thing that I found really helpful is to throw different rules at it, right? So some people would say, okay, well, let's think about what's going to create the greatest amount of good for the greatest number of people. That's the sort of utilitarian view, if we want to put a name on it. Well, okay, if I'm thinking about good for others, does that tip the scales in any option? Maybe, maybe not. Okay. Are there any sort of rules that suggest what I should do that I've maybe avoided before? Does that tip the scales? That's what philosophers would call the deontological view, which we don't need to know the name of, but might be helpful if you want. Or also, if I decide X over Y, what kind of person am I becoming? That's, to give it a title, that's an Aristotelian, what Aristotle would say. He says, the way that you should choose should be based on the knowledge that you're cultivating, the kind of person you are, your character and stuff. And I guess what I'm saying is, if it feels really neck and neck, and you really are stuck, then maybe throw some other things at it to say, well, has that tipped the scales? Has that made me think of something else that's tipped the scales? And if you've done all of those, what kind of person would I be? How much good is this creating for other people? Are there any rules that I've missed? You might still be neck and neck, and then I think we get pushed back to that quote that I shared before, which, again, I think if I said, well, there's just an easy answer, do this technique, then we're sort of short-circuiting the beauty of what she's talking about, and in fact, no one can give you the answer for that. No one can tell you, you have to just do this, or think about these things, which might be helpful, like I was just showing. But at some point, there is this point for you to go, okay, I'm going to make a call. And actually, an interesting thing, if it really is so neck and neck, it might be that there isn't a right answer, and that both are equally good. And therefore, it's quite interesting if you ask yourself, well, why am I wrestling with this? Because there might be something that's running in the background that, is uncomfortable. A lot of times I know I don't want to listen to something that's there. But if I'm honest, I should go, oh, yeah, actually, okay. I don't really want to do it because of that. But I guess what I'm saying is, and I feel like I'm probably still talking at you because I feel like this is an unsatisfactory answer. But I think the truth is that, like, this thing, that...
I think it is.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cool, thanks.
No, I think this is a good prompt to say, listen, this is why you are built the way that you are. You're a human. You have this ability to make a decision. It's a privilege as well to some extent. And it's a good prompt.
Okay.
I need it up on a wall.
But it's difficult, isn't it? And it's one of those parts of life where you go, oh, that's true, but, it's not easy. But I think, that's, again, I'm not going to get into existentialism right now. It's really great stuff. But I think what the existentialists were trying to do was say, let's sort of notice that the world we've woken up in is one where you've got to make these kinds of calls, and you sort of have to, like, create some reasons for yourself a lot of time and give your own life meaning, and that takes hard work, but, like, the alternative is not living, And so it's really uncomfortable, but it's important for us to do. So sort of on that bombshell, I think I'll probably draw our time to a close, and just say thank you so much for everything that you've in the room you've brought to this. Thank you so much to everyone that's been here. despite not physically. I hope you've still felt sort of really involved and have benefited. I know there's been a lot of sort of chat between people online, and that's been really interesting to see as well. So thank you so much for being here, and thanks for sort of really being here, whether in person or not. I think everyone was sort of bringing a lot to it. I hope you find it really useful, and tomorrow there's sort of some fuel for your focus. Thank you again to Fora for making this a part of your program, which is incredibly exciting. If you don't know, there's some really, really great things coming up in the rest of the program, so do have a look at everything that they're doing. And yeah, thank you so much again. Thanks, everyone.